Okay, so one of the reasons why I thought it was important to discuss the fourth dimension is a lot of people in the spiritual community have not reached the fifth dimension. You cannot get to the fifth dimension lest you go through the fourth dimension. Okay? Now, there are people going through the fourth dimension not as a result of spiritual evolution. I was going to say evolution or even spiritual ascension. Some of them are trying to synthesize their way to the fourth dimension, right? And it says, well, why is the fourth dimension different? Such concepts as the hypercube and the hypersphere and the existence of other universes assume that the fourth and the fifth and the sixth dimensions are all exact equivalent of the three physical ones which describe our world, interchangeable in every way and mathematically indistinguishable, since these describe our space, not in the ordinary, not the NASA sense. They are conventionally referred to as spatial dimensions. However, we must recognize that of these dimensions, three are, to a human being, special. The eminent 19th mathematician and scientist James Clerk Maxwell stated the problem in a letter to his friend and fellow scientist C.J. Monroe over 100 years ago. He wrote, "The particularity of our space is that it is three-dimensional. None is before or after another. As is X, so is Y, and so is Z. If you have four dimensions, this becomes a puzzle. For first, if three of them are in our space, then which three? Also, if we live in a space of M first, which N secondly? If so, what would happen requiring the rest to explain them? And so we would be stultified or made wiser." Okay? Maxwell's conundrum. If there are more than three mathematically identical dimensions, why and how does the human body select only three of them? Has it never been answered? But there may be a hint or a clue in our bug on a pond analogy. And the next chapter studies the changes in the bug's world. If the water level raises or falls, causing him to move in the third dimension without his realizing it. But what if he moves and the surface does not? Suppose he is lifted off the surface by a gust of wind or pushed under it by a falling twig or a raindrop. Under these circumstances, the whole of his environment is drastically changed. This is obviously because the bug's world consists of the surface between two different medias, air and water. By analogy, it is possible that our universe consists of three-dimensional surfaces between two four-dimensional volumes with different characteristics, as if, for instance, our hypersphere universe was filled with space of a different density from that outside it. This could be the answer Maxwell was looking for, that the fourth dimension is unlike the other three because it is not symmetrical. Movement in one way meets different characteristics from movement in the other direction. However, these are considerable problems inherent in this idea, which are discussed in more details in Appendix 5. So, a lot of people play around in the third dimension and the fourth dimension. Okay? The first dimension is like completely flat. Right? It's just flat. And then the second dimension is like a drawing upon the flat surface. Right? And then the third dimension is where you actually have, actual like objects, like mass, right? But the fourth dimension is where, we kind of, we've kind of learned, to play with, because it's, it has to be of a different form, and we have to leave our material bodies behind. Okay? So, in the beginning of this book, it does talk about how it talks about like the physical world as our senses of sight, hearing, etc. know it, and which is investigated by science. Second, the internal world of our mental processes and spiritual experiences. 3, the world of so-called paranormal events, below hazy, contradictory, and contentious to a degree. And 4, the infinite expanse of knowledge and reality which we must presume may exist, but which is so far unknown to us. Some 20 years ago or so, as a consequence of a habit of omnivorous and undisciplined reading, I began to accumulate one or two ideas, confusing, complex, and fascinating. Odd pieces of jigsaw seemed to fit together. The vague pattern began to emerge. They were mostly concerned with various aspects of an elusive, abstract concept halfway between scientific fact and metaphysical mumbo-jumbo, and often referred to as the fourth dimension, although cropping up in a variety of disguises. The final incentive to put these ideas on paper and attempt to make some kind of sense out of them came from reading Arthur Koestler's book, The Act of Creation, in which he discusses, among other things, the process by which scientific discoveries are made. Okay? So, this book is very interesting because it helps you develop a philosophy about the concept of a fourth dimension. See, we have people who play with fourth dimension, okay? And they're playing with it without full knowledge and without even a philosophical concept of what that means, right? And in a way, they're like, well, okay, it's kind of like the infinity symbol, where we revolve around our three-dimensional world, and then we dip and dabble into the fourth dimension, but we come back to our three-dimensional world, kind of like a figure eight, right? But we spend more time in the three-dimensional than we do the fourth-dimensional, right? And they're happy with that. The majority of people are happy with that because there's a lot of people that don't care about that at all, right? They're not going to care about other dimensions until they get closer to the grave. When they start getting closer to the grave, then people start wondering, well, where do we go when we finish this life that we've experienced here? And it is a beautiful life here, right? Like those people over there on that sailboat taking an excursion, right? Then we have these people walking and getting their exercise on. Across there, you can see people just riding around the lake in their vehicles. I believe I have some people even sitting back here, enjoying the view also. But that's a beautiful view right